Congressman Jamie Raskin sat down with Jesse Dollemore and with me in Washington, D.C., constitutional law expert. He knows what is it that it will take to stop this authoritarian nightmare. Can Democrats do it? How should they do it? Let's get to that conversation.
Congressman, thanks for joining us. We appreciate you.
I'm psyched to be here.
With all of the damage and the deleterious effects of Donald Trump's the policies and his appointments, RFK and Linda McMahon and Doug Collins, the list goes on and on and on. What should the coordinated strategy from elected officials be to combat, I know it's kind of an overarching question, but to combat what's happening, both from messaging, but also action to combat Donald Trump right now?
Well, we've got to use every lever at our disposal in the constitutional system to fight back. And that's what we're doing. So we just had a hearing. I did this with Dick Durbin. We had a bicameral hearing with the Democrats in the House and the Senate with state attorneys general. And so we had a bunch of attorney generals come to talk about what they're doing to fight back. And we're working with them, filing amicus briefs in all of these cases, whether it's against Donald Trump's unconstitutional birthright citizenship order purporting to nullify birthright citizenship, or his impounding of hundreds of billions of dollars in federal funds through an unconstitutional spending freeze. Whatever it might be, we're intervening to stop them in court. We're fighting in the House. We're fighting in the Senate. And above all, we're fighting in the streets. I thought that the No Kings rallies were not only a magnificent achievement, but a really important intervention in terms of the dynamics of American politics, because the people are sovereign. And so we're fighting along with our allies at the state level and the local level. This mayoral victory in New York that happened yesterday is huge for progressive politics in the country, just huge. And a demonstration that we can build massive turnout. We can up turnout. Same thing happened with Mikey Sherrill in New Jersey. 350,000 new people came out to vote, she told me, increasing the numbers. And that's ultimately what progressive politics is about. It's progress for the country by getting more people engaged and involved in the fight for freedom and democracy.
What are the levers that exist specifically last time you were on my show, we talked about, we use phrases like the law dictates that, the Constitution guarantees that, and then that all is in a framework where people actually listen to court orders or they provide the due process that's due to people. If you have an administration that's just ignoring all of that, and you have a party that doesn't really do much to say, hey, we want to hold you accountable as the law and order candidate and party that you said you were part of,
right.
What can you do at the end of the day?
So, that is the right question, because if you believe in the Constitution in 2025, you got to fight for the Constitution in 2025. So take war powers. It's just totally abundantly, overwhelmingly clear that only Congress has the power to declare war and to take us to war. I was reading some stuff this morning from James Madison, who said, this provision in the Constitution demonstrates the wisdom of the Constitution, because the framers did not trust one guy. That for them, the image they had was a king, but a president could become a king and plunge us into wars of fortune and profit and avarice and caprice, right? Somebody could just decide, I don't like that person, I'm going to go to war, or we're going to make some money. And, Madison said, just like the Constitution says only Congress can get us into war, only Congress, through the treaty power, can get us into an alliance. And there you need a 2/3 vote of the Senate in order to get us into a treaty. So, the framers were just deathly afraid of what a president would do if he alone had the war power. So what are we doing? Well, we got the War Powers Act, which a prior Congress passed, but we're trying to implement the War Powers Act. We're trying to get a majority of our colleagues, and it's a bipartisan at this point, to sign on to a War Powers Act resolution demanding that the president come here. We are raising our constitutional prerogatives on a daily basis. We just had a press conference this morning about that. And, the wisdom of the founders is vindicated by the fact that what looks like it might be a cakewalk, and so why shouldn't a president be able to just bomb Iran? The more you look at it, suddenly begins to disassemble in different ways. And there's a lot of fraudulence and a lot of PR that's built into these, presidential hits. That's something the framers were really aware of. They thought that presidents would get into a war of glory, a war of ego, just to try to pump themselves up.
I'm a little surprised to hear the word fraud brought up in the same sentence as Donald Trump, but we'll ignore that. Apart from violating Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution with war powers and trying to amend the Constitution through executive action, what do you think governors using their 10th Amendment rights under the Constitution, what more can they be doing? What would you like to see them be doing to combat Donald Trump?
Well, I suppose it's an irony that the people who paid such lip service to the powers of the states and federalism, state governments, are just trampling the powers of the states on a daily basis. Governor Newsom and Mayor Bass had the situation under control in California. It was like mass nonviolent peaceful protest, and then there was an 8 or 10 block area where there were riots happening, and they dealt with it. They've got the police power there. They've got the chief of police. They didn't need Donald Trump coming in, but of course, he didn't see riots happening 6 blocks away from where he was on January 6, 2021. He didn't see a threat when 140 of our police officers were being injured, wounded, permanently disabled, and disfigured by his mob. He couldn't lift a finger there. He couldn't call the National Guard that was under his direct control, because the DC National Guard's under his control. But he wants to federalize the National Guard and send federal troops to California when the state and local law enforcement leaders are saying, we don't need your help. You're just going to make it worse. And he did. So California went to court. We're totally with them on that to say, no, you don't have the power to federalize the National Guard or send troops into our state unless there's a real insurrection or rebellion. They won a great opinion from the district court judge. Unfortunately, the Ninth Circuit has put a stay on that. And so, that's what these judicial battles are like. It's a seesaw fight. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, but we're winning every single day. I think we now are over 195 preliminary injunctions or temporary restraining orders against this reign of lawlessness. But as you move up in the courts, it gets more difficult. And of course, the most difficult is the Supreme Court, because you're already starting with a 2-justice deficit with Scalia and Thomas, who are just acting like, mega, political operatives out in a state primary election or something.
Yeah.
You mentioned Gavin Newsom, to sort of switch gears only partially. I spoke to him last week, and he described, this incredible situation where the president said, I spoke to Gavin Newsom in the last day about the National Guard. It turned out they had spoken 4 days earlier, and that it was not about the National Guard. And Governor Newsom brought up that generally, he thinks something is going on here. He's not a doctor. He didn't make any medical diagnosis, but the idea that this is a guy who's a little bit unstable. Sometimes there's 30-hour periods during which there's not a longer than 3-hour break at any point from posting on Truth Social, right? I'm talking even overnight, no more than a 3-hour break.
Wow.
It's sort of like a what's happening here. Have any of your colleagues on the Republican side intimated to you that they also suspect something may be going on with the president that is more than just he's a little excited? In other words, all of these questions that the corporate media doesn't seem to want to ask about
Not
the
a
president.
word from any of them. Some of them do have questions about war powers.
Okay.
So, some of them are willing, at least behind the scenes, to have a rational discussion about what's taking place. But on that, no. In fact, they keep talking about Joe Biden. Right. And I think that the obsession with Joe Biden's geriatric health is a complete projection of what is going on with Donald Trump now. Of course, but nobody's talked about the 25th Amendment and the presidential incapacity or inability to meet the demands of his office. But what we see on TV is truly cause for some alarm.
Not to ask you to diagnose the Republican Party or individual Republicans or even get into their brains, that's impossible. But,
unless you want to.
Yeah. But what do you're here, you work with these people on a daily basis, you hear conversations at an arm's length. What do you think the underlying motivation is or cause of their, is it just pure sycophancy? Is it fear of Donald Trump? Is it fear of electoral consequences based on the ire of MAGA? What is it?
Well, it reminds me of the conversation we're having about judicial independence, because the framers of the Constitution and Jefferson in the Declaration said King George was adamant about subduing the political will of the judges and controlling their salaries and controlling their tenure in office.
He swapped judges out.
Yeah.
Yeah, before the revolution.
And, we're in a fight right now to protect judicial independence against Republicans who want to try to control their access to security funding, for example. Well, judges have to know that they have adequate security funding. Otherwise, they're in real trouble in terms of being able to render the decisions they need to make if they're worried about whether they or their families are going to come under violent attack. And the threats are through the roof, not just for members of Congress now, but for judges too, ever since Trump began to say that Judge Boasberg should be impeached for what he had done, a radical left rogue judge who was appointed by President George W. Bush and was Brett Kavanaugh's roommate at Yale Law School. So, but it's the same sort of thing, which is there's a political economy to the invertebrate discipline and cultishness of the Republican Party. Most of these people feel like Donald Trump could oust them just by endorsing a primary opponent. He used to have Elon Musk's money that he could unleash on them, but they got plenty of other sources to get money to unleash on them. But it's not just that they could diselect you or get you thrown out of office. It's also that, well, there's violent threats out there that are very easy to be activated, but also even if you decide, okay, you're going to get out of Congress and go do something different, you will never work in this town again, kind of thing. You will never be a lobbyist. We will not allow you to work in our hemisphere. So to get out is really to get out. That's like Liz Cheney, Adam Kinzinger, Mitt Romney. And it's not a surprise that some of them have independent sources of power and income where they're not so worried about it. But a lot of the Republicans feel like, I don't know what I would do if these people oust me. And it's like being shunned by a religious cult at that point. So there is a real regime of fear that's taking place. On the other hand, that's not attractive to everybody else in society. They see how the Republican Party is operating, and most people don't want to end up sleeping on the basement listening to tapes of Donald Trump all night and selling flowers and incense at Dulles Airport for the rest of their lives. They would rather think for themselves like Americans do.
Last thing I want to ask you, and we'll let you go. A question I get from my audience often is, January 2029, does the MAGA movement end with the end of Donald Trump's second term, or is this a movement that might persevere? And if it's a maybe, what does it depend on?
Yeah, I think that the evils that people do in their lives probably live on beyond them, right? And, MAGA will keep going on in some form. The real question for us is, we've got to put the program in place right now to show people what we're fighting to create in Project 2029. That's going to be our project. That's going to be our answer to Project 2025. And that's got to be not just democracy and freedom and justice for Americans across the country, but continuing achievements of democracy in terms of things like universal pre-K and making sure we've got health care for everybody in the country, and a right to vote, a constitutional right to vote for everybody, and statehood. And I'm not talking about Greenland and Canada and Panama. I'm talking about Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico and millions of disenfranchised Americans across the country. So I'm not content to be talking about restoration of the status quo ante before Donald Trump ever appeared. I'm talking about moving strong constitutional democracy into the future for this century. And we've got the leaders, we've got the activists to do it, and we got the kids in Democracy Summer all over America ready to fight.
Congressman, thank you.
Yeah, I was going to ask you for one last inspirational message, but you nailed it right there, so I didn't need to
Thanks
ask.
so much.
Great to see you guys. Keep up the great work.
Thank you.
Because the media is not the enemy of the people. You're the people's best friend. So
That's what
thanks
we're
for
saying.
You're doing, so.
I've been saying that for a long time.